I was walking into a board meeting when my mother called. She didn't ask if I had a minute. She said, "We sold your old house. We needed the money to buy your sister a new car. You don't live there anyway." I stood in the hallway outside the conference room. 11 people waiting on the other side of the glass. "You're not mad, are you?" she said. I said, "No. No need." I hung up. I walked in. I ran the meeting. Because the house she said they sold, the one my uncle built with his own hands and left to me, wasn't hers to sell. It never had been. And there was one thing about that house my mother had never once thought to check. My name is Carolyn Myers. I'm 31 years old. By the end of the month, she would learn it in a room full of witnesses. Before I take you back to the beginning, if your stomach just dropped the way mine did, take a second to like and subscribe. And tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is there. I read everyone. I'm Carolyn. This is the story of the house my uncle left me, the family that tried to sell it out from under me, and the one thing they never knew. Let's go back to the spring my uncle handed me a key. And a secret. People who meet me at work assume I've always been calm. The CFO who never raises her voice. The one who finds the error in the third column and fixes it before anyone panics. I built that person on purpose. In my family, there were 2 daughters. Brooke was the one they celebrated. I was the one they relied on. Those are not the same thing, and I learned the difference young. When something broke, I fixed it. When a bill came due, I paid it. When my mother needed someone to drive 4 hours and sit in a hospital waiting room, I was the one who went. That was my role. I told myself it was love. For a long time, I didn't look too closely at whether it ran both ways. The house was different from everything else in my life, because the house was the one thing nobody asked me to fix. It was just given. It sat on a lake in western Massachusetts, 2 hours from Boston. White clapboard. A green metal roof. A dock my uncle built one board at a time the summer I turned 9. He let me hand him the screws. On the last post, before he set it, he carved his initials and a date into the underside where the water couldn't reach. TC. I used to swim down and run my fingers over it. My uncle was Theodore Calloway. Theo. My mother's older brother. He was a carpenter who became a small builder, and he made just enough money to be the person the rest of the family had opinions about. He never married. He had me. When he died, the spring I was 29, he left me the lake house. I remember the day I got the keys. There was a single key on a ring, and a smaller one for the boathouse, and I drove out and stood on the dock and didn't know what to do with myself. The house was too big for one person who came up 4 weekends a year. But it was his, and now it was mine, and I wasn't going to be the one who let it fall apart. So I did the practical thing. The thing I always did. I made it someone else's job to watch. My parents lived an hour closer to the lake than I did. My father was a contractor. He knew houses. It made sense. The week after the funeral, I drove to their place and put a spare key on the kitchen table. "Just keep an eye on it," I said. "Run the water in the winter so the pipes don't freeze. Mow it a few times. I'll pay for whatever it needs." My mother picked up the key and turned it over in her fingers like she was reading something on it. "That's a lot of house for a girl who's never home," she said. I didn't hear it then the way I hear it now. At the time, it sounded like a complaint about my schedule, like she missed me. I told her I'd come up more. "You always say that," she said. My father didn't say anything. He was looking at the key in her hand. I remember that, because at the time it meant nothing, and later it meant everything. I drove home that night thinking I'd done the responsible thing. I'd protected the house. I'd kept it in the family's hands. I had handed my mother exactly what she needed. To understand why my uncle left the house to me and not to his own sister, why that decision sat in my mother like a stone for 2 years, you have to go back further than the funeral. You have to go back to the first time Theo got sick. I was 15. He was in his early 50s, and the word the doctors used was the word nobody in our family was allowed to say out loud. So we said Theo's treatment and Theo's appointments, and pretended it was a project with an end date. Theo had money then. Not a lot, but more than my parents, because he'd sold a couple of the houses he'd built and he didn't spend much. And when you're sick and you have money and no spouse, somebody steps in to help manage things. My parents stepped in. I didn't understand the details at 15. I understood them later, when I was the one reconciling accounts for a living and my uncle, dying, finally told me what had happened. While Theo was in treatment, too tired to read a bank statement, my mother held his power of attorney. My father called it consolidating. Over about 2 years, a little over $200,000 moved out of my uncle's accounts and into things that benefited my parents. A truck, a kitchen renovation, a loan to my father's business that was never a loan because it was never repaid. When Theo got better, and that first time, he did get better, the money was gone. He didn't sue. He didn't make a scene. That wasn't him. He just stopped trusting them. Quietly, the way some men do, where they're polite at Thanksgiving, and they never lend you $1 again. But here's the part that mattered. The part I lived. During those 2 years, I was the one who went. My mother was managing things, which apparently did not include sitting in a vinyl chair under fluorescent lights for 4 hours while the drip ran. My father was working. Brooke was 10 and too young. So when Theo needed a ride to the cancer center, and he didn't want to go alone, the family volunteered me. I was 15. I had a learner's permit and then a license, and my uncle in the passenger seat telling me to slow down on the turns. I want to be honest. At the time, I didn't go because I was noble. I went because I was told to. Because that was already my job in the family. To be the one who showed up so no one else had to. But somewhere in those waiting rooms, it stopped being a chore. Theo would bring 2 coffees and a deck of cards. He taught me gin rummy under those lights. He told me about building the dock. He asked me what I wanted to be, and he was the first adult who listened to the answer instead of correcting it. There was one afternoon I've never forgotten. The infusion ran long, and Theo dozed off in the chair with the line still in his arm, and I sat next to him doing my chemistry homework on my knees. A nurse came by and looked at the 2 of us and asked if I was his daughter. I said no, his niece. She smiled and said, "He's lucky to have you. Most people in that chair, nobody comes." Then she went down the hall to the next patient. I looked around the room. She was right. There were 8 or 9 recliners, and most of the people in them were alone. A man reading a paperback. A woman with her eyes closed and earbuds in. And it struck me, at 15, that showing up was rarer than it should have been. That it counted for something I couldn't see yet. When Theo woke up, he caught me watching him. "You're supposed to be doing homework," he said. "I am." "You're watching me sleep like I'm already dead." He said it dry, almost laughing. "Stop it. I've got at least 1 more dock in me." I laughed. He won 3 hands of gin rummy on the drive home and made me admit it. I didn't know, those afternoons, what my mother was doing with the hours she wasn't spending in that room. I found out years later when I was an adult who reconciled accounts for a living, and Theo finally told me the rest. While I sat under the fluorescent lights, my mother sat at his kitchen table with his checkbook and his power of attorney, consolidating. She'd write a check to my father's business and call it a loan. She'd put a new truck on his credit and call it a necessity, because how else would the family help him get to appointments? She had a reason for every dollar. She always did. That was the thing about my mother. She never stole anything. In her own telling, she only ever rearranged what was already supposed to be hers. There's a particular Thanksgiving I think about. I was 16. Theo had finished treatment that fall. We were all at my parents' table, and my mother was telling a story about how hard that year had been on the family, how much we had sacrificed for Theo. And I watched my uncle set down his fork. He didn't argue. He just looked at her for a long moment, and then he looked at me, and something passed between us that I didn't have words for at 16. He knew who had shown up, and he knew who hadn't. He carried that quietly for years. We both did. Then, when I was 24, it came back. The second time, the doctors didn't talk about end dates anymore. Theo called me himself. Not my mother. Me. I drove out to the lake house. He was thinner, but he made coffee like always, and we sat on the dock he'd built, and he told me he'd gotten his affairs in order. I told him I didn't want to talk about affairs. I wanted more summers. He smiled at that. Then he said something I didn't understand for almost 7 years. I made sure you'll be all right, he said. Whatever happens with the rest of them. I made sure. I thought he meant a little money. I thought he meant he loved me. I said I knew, and I changed the subject, because I was 24, and I couldn't sit in the truth that he was leaving. I didn't ask what he meant. That's the thing I'd change, if I could change one thing. Not because I needed to know sooner, because I'd have told him I understood. I'd have told him thank you, for more than the house. He died the following spring. I was 29, and the thing he made sure of, the thing he set in place that quiet year, was sitting in a lawyer's office the whole time, waiting for the day my mother would finally reach for what was never hers. If you were the one who showed up while everyone else showed up only for the money, tell me below. I think there are more of us than people admit. 3 years after the funeral, my company sent me west. It was a long assignment. 7 weeks in California and Washington, restructuring the finance side of a logistics group we'd acquired. 3 time zones. Early mornings on the East Coast clock, late nights on the West. The kind of stretch where you live out of one suitcase and your family becomes a series of texts you answer between meetings. I left in the middle of March. Before I went, I did what I always did. I tied off loose ends. I prepaid the lake house property taxes for the year. I emailed my father a reminder to run the water and check the sump pump after the thaw. I told my mother I'd be hard to reach but to call if anything came up. With the house? My mother asked. With anything, I said. She was quiet for a second. Don't worry about the house, she said. We've got it handled. I remember thinking that was nice of her. That maybe 2 years on she'd softened about it. The texts during those 7 weeks were ordinary. Brooke sent me a video of a dog at a coffee shop. My mother sent a photo of her garden. My father, who never texted, sent exactly 1 message in the 4th week, and at the time it didn't register as strange. The paperwork on the deed, it said. Where do you keep the original? I was in a 7 a.m. meeting when it came in. I typed back without thinking hard about it. Lawyer has it. Why? Then someone asked me a question about depreciation schedules, and I put my phone face down and forgot the exchange for a month. He didn't reply. I didn't follow up. I know now what that question was. It was my father, doing what he always did, looking for the easy version of a thing my mother had already decided to do the hard way. He wanted to know if there was an original deed he could simply hand over. There wasn't. Not in the way he meant. So they did the other thing, while I was 3,000 miles away, living on a clock that was always wrong. They sat down with a stack of forms. There was a Tuesday in late April. I know the date now because I've read the filing. That morning, my time, I was on a 6 a.m. call about quarterly close. That afternoon, their time, in a title office 2 hours from my empty apartment, my parents signed a deed transferring the lake house to a couple named Mark and Patricia Donnelly for $490,000. My name was on that deed as the seller. I was not in the state. I had never met the Donnellys. I had never listed the house, never spoken to an agent, never agreed to anything. Someone had signed my name, and then, with the money, they bought my sister a car. I didn't know any of it yet. I flew home the second week of May with a dead phone and a stiff neck, thinking the hardest thing waiting for me was a backlog of email. Then my mother called me on my way into a board meeting, and the floor of my life quietly opened up. The call lasted 90 seconds. I've replayed it enough times that I could perform it. My mother's voice, light, almost cheerful. "We sold your old house." The phrase, "your old house," like it was a starter apartment I'd outgrown, and not the place my uncle died. "We needed the money for Brooke's car." Then, when I said nothing, "You're not mad, are you?" I said, "No. No need." I hung up before my hand could shake. I ran the board meeting. I want you to understand that I ran it well. I presented the West Coast integration numbers. I answered every question, and not one of those 11 people knew that somewhere under the table, my thumbnail had cut a small crescent into my own palm. The composure was not strength. It was the oldest reflex I had. When my family did something to me, I did not react. I went still, and I got accurate. I went home that evening to an apartment that had been empty for 7 weeks. There was mail stacked on the counter where my neighbor had left it. A dead plant I'd forgotten to ask anyone to water. The ordinary debris of a life paused. I made tea I didn't drink, and I sat at the kitchen island, and I did not call my mother back, because I knew that if I called her, she would talk, and her talking would reorganize the facts in my head into whatever shape was easiest for her. I had spent 30 years letting her do that. Not tonight. Instead, I did the thing I do when a number doesn't make sense. I went looking for the source document. That night, in my apartment, I got accurate. I have an app on my phone that monitors the public property records for addresses I own. I'd set it up after the funeral, the way I set up alerts for everything, because that is the kind of person I am. I had honestly forgotten it was there. I opened it. There was one notification, dated late April. Deed recorded. Status, transferred. I sat on my kitchen floor with my back against the cabinet and read it 3 times. Grantor, that's the seller, listed as Carolyn Myers. Grantee, Mark and Patricia Donnelly. Consideration, $490,000. A recording stamp from the county registry. There was a scanned image of the deed attached. I opened it. My name was at the bottom, above the line that said, Grantor, in cursive. A signature. I have signed my name several 100,000 times. On checks, on closing documents, on the back of my own marriage that didn't happen, and the front of a dozen leases. I know my signature the way you know your own face in a dark window. This was not my signature. It was close. Someone had clearly looked at a real one and copied it. The C was right. The slant was wrong. The way I crossed the Y, I drag it back to the left. Always. A little hook. Whoever did this looped it forward. A small thing. The kind of small thing that is invisible to everyone except the person who has made that exact mark her whole life. Someone had sat at a table with a pen and practiced being me. I did not cry. I want to be honest about that, because people expect the crying and it didn't come. Not then. What came was very cold and very clear, and it said one sentence over and over in a voice that did not sound like the daughter who paid everyone's bills. Someone signed my name, and a county clerk stamped it. And my mother called to ask if I was mad. The next morning, I did not call my mother. I called the county. I want to walk you through this part slowly, because this is where the story stops being about feelings and starts being about facts. And facts were the only thing I had ever been able to win with. The clerk at the Registry of Deeds was patient with me. I told her I believed a deed had been recorded against my property fraudulently. She told me how to request a certified copy of the recorded instrument and the notarial certificate attached to it. I requested both. I paid the fee. I gave my real signature on the request form and asked, on a hunch, whether she could tell me the name of the notary who had acknowledged the seller's signature. She could. It was a name I half recognized but couldn't place. Patricia. No, not Patricia Donnelly. A different name. I wrote it down and set it aside, and it would matter more than I knew. Then I went looking for my uncle's lawyer. When Theo died, the estate had been handled by an attorney out in Springfield, near the lake. I'd met her exactly twice. Once when she read me the basics after the funeral. Once when I signed something I barely read because I was too raw to care. I remembered her as dry and exact, and a little severe, the kind of woman who corrects your grammar in a condolence card. I had filed her card in a folder labeled, with my usual romance, estate. Eleanor Hartley. Hartley and Crane. I called her at 9 the next morning. I expected a paralegal and a week of phone tag. Instead, a flat, precise voice picked up on the second ring and said, "Hartley." I told her my name. There was a pause, and then a slight change in the voice, a sharpening of attention. "Carolyn," she said, "Theodore's niece." Not a question. "Someone sold the lake house," I said. "They forged my signature on the deed. I think it was my parents. I don't know what my options are, and I don't—" "Stop," Eleanor said, not unkindly. "Tell me the exact address and the date of the recording." I told her. I heard her typing. Then I heard her stop typing. "Carolyn," she said, "I need you to listen carefully because I'm about to tell you something your uncle paid me a great deal of money to be able to tell you on a day exactly like this one." She paused. "The lake house is not yours?" The floor tilted again. "What?" "It's not your parents' either," she said. "And, technically, on the day that deed was signed, it was not yours to sell. It belongs to a trust, the Calloway Family Trust. Your uncle moved the property into an irrevocable trust in 2018, 3 years before he died. You are the sole beneficiary. I am the trustee." I didn't say anything. I was standing in my kitchen with a pen in my hand and no paper, and I had stopped breathing. "Do you understand what that means?" she asked. "Tell me," I said, "like I'm not a finance person. Tell me like I'm a regular person who just got hit by a truck." So she did. It means," Eleanor said, "that your uncle put that house somewhere your family couldn't reach it. An irrevocable trust isn't owned by you the way your car is. It's held by the trust. The only person on earth who could legally sell that house is the trustee, acting under the terms your uncle set. That's me. And I have never sold anything. I have never been asked to. I didn't know it was on the market until you called me 60 seconds ago. Then the deed. The deed is a forgery of a signature that, even if it were real, would have conveyed nothing," she said. "Your parents didn't just forge your name, Carolyn. They forged the name of someone who didn't have the power to sign in the first place. It's like selling a building you don't own by faking the signature of the doorman." She let that sit. "A forged deed is void. Not voidable. Void. It transfers no title, not even to an innocent buyer who paid full price in good faith. The house was never yours to sell, and on paper, it was never sold." I put my hand flat on the counter. The cold of it came up through my palm. "The Donnellys," I said, "the people who bought it, are almost certainly victims too," Eleanor said, "which we'll deal with. But the house, legally, has never left the trust. Your uncle made sure of that. I made sure. 7 years, and there it was. The thing he'd said on the dock. The thing I never asked about." "There's something else you should know," Eleanor said, more quietly now. "When your uncle set up the trust, he left a letter, sealed. My instructions were to give it to you only if someone ever tried to take the house. Not when he died. Not at probate. Only if someone reached for it. A pause. Carolyn. Someone has reached for it. I drove out to Springfield 2 days later. Eleanor's office was on the second floor of a brick building, the kind of practice that has been quietly competent in the same town for 40 years. She met me at the door herself. In person, she was smaller than her voice, gray hair cut sharp, reading glasses on a chain. She shook my hand once, firmly, like she was confirming I was real. On her desk was a single envelope. Cream-colored, my name written across the front in handwriting I would have known anywhere. Theo wrote in capital letters, always. A builder's print. Like he was labeling lumber. Carolyn. He wrote it himself, Eleanor said. 18 months before he passed. He came in, set up the trust, and then he sat where you're sitting and he wrote that letter. And he made me promise. He said, Eleanor, my sister is going to come for this house someday. Not today, but someday. When she does, give my girl this. Eleanor took off her glasses. I thought, frankly, that he was being unkind to your mother. In 30 years of estate work, you learn most families are not as bad as the dying fear they are. She looked at me. He was right. I'm sorry to say it, but he was right, and I was wrong. She slid the envelope across the desk and stood up. I'll get coffee. Take whatever time you need. I waited until the door closed. Then I opened it. I'm not going to read you all of it. Some of it belongs only to me. But I'll tell you the shape of it. Because the shape is the thing that broke me and then put me back together in a different arrangement. He started by apologizing for being dramatic. If you're reading this, he wrote, then I was right about something I hoped I was wrong about. And I'm sorry. You deserved a family that made this letter unnecessary. Then he told me the part of the money story I didn't know. How my mother had taken the $200,000 during his first illness. How he'd decided not to fight it, because fighting his own sister would have cost more than the money. But how he'd watched, that whole time, and seen exactly one person in the family show up for him for free. A teenager with a learner's permit and 2 coffees and a deck of cards. You think you came because they made you, he wrote. Maybe the first time. But you kept coming. Nobody made you teach an old man to laugh in a chemo chair. You did that on your own. He wrote about the dock. He remembered the screws. He remembered me diving down to find his initials every summer, like checking that the world was still where I left it. And then he explained the trust, in plain language, the way Eleanor had. I'm not leaving you the house in a will, he wrote, because a will can be fought, and your mother will fight. I'm putting it somewhere she can't follow. I'm making it so that even if she gets you to sign something, or forges your name, or sweet-talks a judge, the house simply isn't yours to give away. It's the trust's. And the trust answers to Eleanor, and Eleanor answers to the truth. I'm sorry to tie your hands. It's the only way I could think of to keep them from tying yours. The last lines I will read you, because I think Theo would want them said out loud. You were the one who showed up. So the house is yours to keep, not yours to lose. Sit on the dock. Run your fingers over my initials. And don't you dare feel guilty about people who never felt guilty about you. I cried then. Once, hard, with my hand over my mouth, in a stranger's office in a town 2 hours from home. Then I wiped my face, and I folded the letter and I put it in my bag. When Eleanor came back with the coffee, I was steady. He knew exactly who you were, she said, setting the cup down. It wasn't a question either. He knew exactly who all of us were, I said. Before I left that day, Eleanor spread the certified copy of the forged deed on her desk under a lamp, and the 2 of us bent over it like surgeons. Show me, she said. You know your own hand better than any expert. Show me what's wrong. I put the genuine signature, from the trust acknowledgement I'd signed years before, beside the forgery. Side by side, in lamplight, The difference was almost embarrassing once you saw it. The C is good, I said. Whoever did this practiced the C, but look at the Y. I traced it in the air. When I write my Y, I drag the tail back to the left and hook it under the O. It's a habit. I've done it 10,000 times and I can't not do it. This one loops forward, like they were taught cursive in a different decade than I was. Eleanor leaned closer. And the slant. Mine leans right, hard, like I'm always in a hurry. This one's almost upright. Careful. Slow. I sat back. It's a slow person copying a fast person. You can see them concentrating. Eleanor made a note. A forensic document examiner will say exactly that, in language a judge respects. But it helps to hear it from you first. She tapped the notary's seal at the bottom. And here's the second crime, stamped right next to the first. We'll come to her. Here is where most people expect the story to speed up. The wronged daughter learns the truth. And then there's a montage. And then everyone gets what's coming. It didn't go fast. It went careful. Careful was the whole point. Eleanor and I sat down the same afternoon and made a plan, and the first thing she did was the most important thing, and it was almost invisible. She recorded a document called a lis pendens against the property. In plain terms, it's a public notice that says, "This title is in dispute. A lawsuit is coming. Do not touch this." The reason it mattered so much was simple. As long as the Donnellys believed they owned the house free and clear, there was a danger they might sell it again, or borrow against it. And every time a forged title changes hands, it gets messier to unwind. The lis pendens froze everything. The moment Eleanor recorded it, the house could not move another inch. "Now it's a glacier," she said. "Nobody's selling anything to anybody. We have time." The second thing we did was trace the notary. I gave Eleanor the name I'd written down from the registry. The notary who had witnessed my signature on a day I was 3,000 miles away. Eleanor read it and went very still. "I know this name," she said slowly. "Not professionally." She pulled up something on her computer. "Carolyn, this woman isn't a title company notary. This is a private individual with a notary commission, and she's listed as a member of..." Eleanor turned the screen toward me. A community page. A photo of a dozen smiling women around a table. "Your mother's bridge club." I looked at the photo. There, 2 seats down from my mother, was the woman whose stamp had made the forgery official. It clicked into place like a deadbolt. My mother hadn't walked into a random title office and fooled a professional. She'd brought a friend. She'd handed the deed across a card table to a woman she played bridge with on Thursdays, and that woman had pressed her seal onto my forged name as a favor, or for cash, or because she didn't want to ruin the evening by asking questions. "That changes things," Eleanor said. "A notary who falsely acknowledges a signature she didn't witness has committed fraud. It's not a paperwork error. It's a crime, and it ties your mother to the forgery personally. Because who do you think asked her to do it?" Eleanor took her glasses off again. "Your mother didn't hire strangers, Carolyn. She used people who trusted her. That's how this kind of thing always works." The third thing we did was reach the Donnellys. Eleanor handled it, lawyer to lawyer, through the agent who'd brokered the sale. I never spoke to them directly until later. But I learned that Mark and Patricia Donnelly were a couple in their 40s who had sold their own home, packed up their lives, and put nearly $500,000 into a lake house they were planning to retire in. They had done everything right. They'd hired an agent. They'd gotten a title search, which had come back clean because the forged deed hadn't been recorded yet at the time of search, and the trust ownership had been quietly, deliberately structured by my uncle to look like a simple individual transfer on its face. They had bought, in good faith, a house that the seller never owned, and they had just been told, by a lawyer they'd never met, that the woman who sold it to them had forged the signature, that a notice of lawsuit was now on their title, and that the actual owner was a trust they'd never heard of. I felt sick about them. I want to be clear about that. The Donnellys were not my enemy. My enemy had used them as a wallet. We were almost ready. Eleanor was preparing to file the quiet title action that would make a judge say out loud what was already true, that the deed was void and the house belonged to the trust. It would take a hearing. It would take weeks. It would be quiet and procedural and correct. And then my mother did the thing that turned a quiet legal process into the night I'll remember for the rest of my life. She called me, cheerful again, like nothing was wrong because in her mind nothing was. "The Donnellys are having a little housewarming at the lake place Saturday," she said. "They invited the neighbors, and they were kind enough to invite us, since we sold it to them. I think you should come, Carolyn. People are starting to ask why you're being so cold. It would be nice if you could just be normal about this for one afternoon." Be normal. About a party, at my uncle's house, thrown by the people my mother had defrauded, to celebrate a sale that never legally happened. I looked across the desk at Eleanor, who was watching me with an expression I was learning to read. "I'd love to," I told my mother. "Send me the time." I hung up, and Eleanor said, "You're going." "I'm going," I said. "What are you bringing?" I thought about it. "The truth," I said. "And one piece of paper. The lake house in May is the most beautiful it ever is. The water is high from the thaw, the trees are that new green that only lasts 2 weeks, and the dock my uncle built sits out over the water like it's waiting for someone." I drove up on Saturday afternoon. There were a dozen cars in the gravel lot and along the road. About 25 people, I'd guess, scattered across the lawn that used to be mine and, technically, still was. Neighbors with wine glasses, a folding table with a cheese board, and, parked proudly at the center of the gravel where everyone could admire it, a new car with a temporary plate still in the back window. Brooke's car. My uncle's house had been turned into that car, and somebody had driven it to the party. I'd called Eleanor that morning before I left Boston. I told her I was going, and what I planned to do. Nothing illegal, nothing loud, just the recorded deed and the truth, in front of the people my mother had been performing for. "You don't have to do this part," Eleanor said. "The hearing does the legal work. The party does nothing for the case." "It's not for the case," I said. "I know. That's why I'm not stopping you." A pause. "Just don't argue with her. Don't try to win. Lay down the one fact and let her do the rest. People like your mother always do the rest." She was right, and I held onto it like a railing for the next 2 hours. Before I went up to the house, I walked down to the dock. I told myself it was to steady my nerves. The water was high and clear, and I crouched at the end of the boards where the guests couldn't see me and looked down at the post where I knew the initials were. I didn't reach for them. I just looked. Then I stood up, brushed off my knees, and walked up the lawn toward my mother's voice. My mother saw me before I reached the lawn. She was in her element, host adjacent, the woman who used to own this place, holding court near the cheese board. She came toward me with both hands out and a smile pitched for the audience. "Carolyn. Everyone, this is my daughter Carolyn. She's a CFO in Boston." Pride performed. Then, lower, just for me, through the smile. "Thank you for coming. Please, just be pleasant." "I'm always pleasant," I said. My father was by the porch. A beer in his hand he wasn't drinking. He nodded at me and looked away. He couldn't hold my eyes for more than a second. He never could. But that day, it was worse. Mark and Patricia Donnelly found me a few minutes later. They were exactly as I'd pictured. Kind, a little nervous, the way people are when they've sunk everything into a dream, and a lawyer has just told them the dream has a crack in it. Patricia took my hand in both of hers. "You must be Carolyn," she said quietly. Your mother said you grew up coming here. A pause. Waited. We've had some confusing news this week from an attorney. I don't fully understand it. But I wanted you to know, whatever's going on, we love this house. We didn't mean to step into anything. I know you didn't, I said. And I meant it so much my voice almost broke. None of this is your fault. I promise you that. Before today is over, I think you'll understand it better than anyone here. She didn't know what to do with that. She just nodded and squeezed my hand. For a while, I did exactly what my mother asked. I was pleasant. I let her introduce me to neighbors. I held a glass of wine I didn't drink. I let her tell the story of selling the family lake house 3 separate times to 3 separate clusters of guests, and I listened to the version she'd built. Because she had built one. That was the thing I needed the witnesses to hear first. Her version, in her own words, before I touched a single fact. The version went like this. Around the cheese board, to a knot of 6 or 7 neighbors, my mother set her glass down and grew warm and confiding. You know, Carolyn was so generous about the whole thing, she said. She's never here. She's married to that career, and she came to us and said, Mom, the house is just sitting there, you handle it. She practically gifted it to us to sell. We put it toward Brooke's car. Brooke's the younger one. She's just getting started. It's what families do. We pool what we have. She smiled at me across the circle, inviting me into the lie. Isn't that right, Carolyn? The neighbors turned to look at me. Warm faces. Waiting for the dutiful daughter to confirm the lovely story. I set my wine glass down on the table. I felt the old reflex rise. Go still. Smooth it over. Don't make a scene. And I felt something else rise underneath it, something with my uncle's print on it. That's not quite how it happened, I said. The circle went quiet in the particular way a circle goes quiet when it senses weather coming. My mother laughed, light. Oh, Carolyn's modest about it. I never gifted you the house, I said. My voice was even. I wasn't loud. I have learned that the quietest voice in a loud yard is the one people lean toward. I never asked you to sell it. I never spoke to an agent. I was in California the day it was sold. Carolyn. My mother's smile held, but her eyes changed. This isn't the place. You picked the place, I said. You invited me. I reached into my bag. Not for a speech. For the one piece of paper. It was the certified copy of the recorded deed. The forgery. I unfolded it and laid it flat on the table between the cheese and the crackers, turned so the neighbors could see it, and I put my finger on the signature line. This is the deed that sold this house, I said. That's the seller's signature right there. My name, Carolyn Myers. I looked up. I didn't sign it. I have never seen it before the county sent it to me. Someone copied my signature and signed it for me while I was 3,000 miles away. For 1 second, nobody moved. Then my mother did the thing that decided everything. She didn't go pale. She didn't stammer. She picked the deed up off the table, glanced at it, and said, in a clear voice meant for the whole circle, "Don't be ridiculous. That's her signature. I watched her sign it." She said it to defend herself. She said it to a yard full of witnesses. She said it because she had told the lie so many times she'd started to believe she could simply declare things into being true. And she had just sworn out loud in front of a dozen neighbors and the people she'd defrauded that she had personally watched me sign a document I was in another time zone for. I looked at her. I felt very calm and very far away, the way you feel at the top of something before you go down. No, you didn't, I said. And on Tuesday you're going to say that to a judge. Patricia Donnelly had gone white. Mark had set down his glass. My father had not moved from the porch, but his beer was tilted, and a thin line of it was running down the back of his hand, and he wasn't looking away anymore. He was looking at his wife, like he'd never seen her before. My mother realized, a half second too late, that the yard had turned, that the warm faces weren't warm, that she'd been performing for an audience that had just watched the curtain fall in the wrong direction. She set the deed down. Her hand was not quite steady. "This is a misunderstanding," she said, "to the neighbors now, not to me. Families have these. Carolyn is upset about her uncle. She's not thinking clearly." "I'm thinking very clearly," I said. "For the first time in about 30 years. I picked the deed back up, folded it, and put it in my bag. I did not raise my voice once. I turned to Patricia and Mark. "I'm so sorry this is happening at your party," I said. "You'll get the truth and you'll be made whole. I'll make sure of it. My uncle made sure of it." Then, to the yard. "Thank you all for coming. I think the housewarming's over." I walked back to my car across the lawn my uncle mowed and the gravel where my sister's stolen car was parked, and I drove away with my hands steady on the wheel. It wasn't over. I knew that. There was a hearing coming and the law moved slower than a yard full of gasps. But I'd needed her to say it in public, in her own words, with no lawyer in earshot to stop her. She had. And there were 25 people who heard her do it. The hearing was the following week, in a courtroom in Springfield. Quiet title actions aren't dramatic by design. There's no jury. There's a judge, a handful of lawyers, and whoever cares enough to sit in the gallery. About 15 people were in that room. My parents, Brooke, the Donnellys and their attorney, Eleanor and me, the notary, my mother's bridge friend, sitting alone near the back, looking like she hadn't slept, a clerk, and the judge. Eleanor had warned me how it would go, and it went almost exactly the way she said, because the law has a rhythm, and my mother could not stop herself from dancing to it. It started with my mother's account. Through her own attorney, a man who clearly regretted taking the case, she stated for the record that the sale was legitimate, that I had verbally authorized it, that I had signed the deed. Her lawyer asked her plainly, for the record, "Did you witness your daughter sign the deed of sale?" And my mother, under oath, with a court reporter taking it down, said, "Yes, I was there. She signed it." That was the lie. Step 1. She put it on the record herself. Then Eleanor stood up and introduced the first evidence. The Calloway Family Trust documents, executed 2018. She handed copies to the judge and to opposing counsel. She established in about 4 dry minutes that the lake house had been placed into an irrevocable trust 3 years before Theo died, that I was the beneficiary, that she was the trustee, and that the property had never legally been mine to sell as an individual. Only the trustee could convey it, and only under the trust's terms. My mother's attorney leaned over and whispered to her. I watched her shake her head hard. She didn't understand yet what it meant. She thought it was a technicality, so she denied. Step 3. When the judge asked her attorney to respond, my mother spoke up over him, the way she always spoke over my father. "That trust thing doesn't matter," she said. "Carolyn could have signed for it. She handled everything for that house. She had a key." As if a key were a deed. As if proximity were ownership. Then came the stronger evidence, and it came in 2 pieces, back to back. The first was the signature. Eleanor entered a report from a forensic document examiner, a real one, with credentials, who had compared the signature on the recorded deed against 14 verified samples of my actual signature, including ones from years before the sale. His conclusion, read into the record, was that the deed signature was a simulated forgery produced by a person attempting to copy the genuine signature. The hook on my Y. The slant. All of it, documented by someone whose entire profession was seeing what I'd seen on my kitchen floor. The second piece was the notary. Her attorney had clearly told her what was coming, because before Eleanor could even call the question, the bridge friend asked to address the court. Her voice shook. She was not a criminal by nature. She was a 60-year-old woman who had done a favor at a card table and watched it turn into a courtroom. "I didn't watch anyone sign it," she said. "Diane brought it to me already signed. She told me Carolyn couldn't be there but had signed it at home and asked me to notarize it as a favor. I notarized it. I shouldn't have. I notarized a signature I never saw made." She started to cry. "Diane told me it was fine. She said it was all in the family." The room went silent. Step 6. The kind of silence that has a temperature. My mother had told 2 contradictory things under oath in the span of 15 minutes. She had sworn she watched me sign. The notary had just sworn she'd been told I signed it at home, miles away. Both could not be true. Neither was true. And the second one had come from the woman my mother had pulled into the fraud. And then my mother lost control. Step 7. The thing Eleanor had quietly predicted she would do, because people like my mother cannot bear to be the one who is wrong in a room, will always, always reach for the grievance underneath instead of the apology on top. She stood up. Her own lawyer put a hand on her arm and she shook it off. "He left it to her out of spite," she said. "Loud now. The performance gone, the real thing underneath it bare for everyone to see. My own brother. I took care of him. I managed everything when he was sick, and he left the house to a girl who's never even there. It should have been ours. It should have been the family's. I only took what was already supposed to be mine." There it was, in open court, on the record, in front of 15 people and a court reporter. My mother had just explained exactly why she did it. Not a misunderstanding, not a verbal authorization, a motive. She'd taken what she believed she was owed, and she'd forged her daughter's name to do it. And now she'd said so out loud because her pride could not survive the silence. My father put his face in his hands. The judge let the room settle. Then he spoke. And judges don't editorialize. So what he said was short and procedural, and it landed like a door closing. He found that the deed was a forgery and therefore void from its inception, conveying no title. He found that the lake house remained the property of the Calloway Family Trust. He ordered the fraudulent deed expunged from the record. He noted for the Donnellys that their remedy lay against the sellers who had defrauded them, that the trust, as the true owner, bore them no liability, and that they were entitled to recover the money they'd paid from my parents. And then he said the sentence I didn't know I'd been waiting my whole life to hear a person in authority say out loud. He referred the matter, the forgery, the fraudulent notarization, to the district attorney's office for review. Not a civil slap, a criminal referral. For my mother, for the notary, for the scheme. The gavel was quiet. Most of the real ones are. I watched the room instead of the judge. The notary had her hand over her mouth. Brooke was staring at our mother like she was seeing a stranger wearing a familiar face. My father hadn't lifted his head. And my mother was looking around the courtroom with an expression I'd seen my whole life and never once understood until that moment. She was looking for someone to agree with her. She was waiting for the room to take her side, the way it always had at her dinner table, in her kitchen, in every yard where she'd ever performed. The room did not take her side. That was the new thing. That was the thing my uncle had built, reaching out of a sealed envelope to hold the door shut. If you've ever had to let the truth, and maybe a lawyer, do the talking instead of your own anger, I'd like to hear what that cost you. I think it costs more than people expect, and I think it's worth it anyway. Outside the courtroom in the marble hallway, Patricia Donnelly found me. She didn't say anything at first. She just took my hand again, the way she had at the party, and this time she was crying, and so, finally, was I. "You said we'd be made whole," she said. "You didn't have to fight for us. We were the people who took your house. You were never the people who took my house," I said. You were just the wallet she reached for. My uncle built that place to protect me from her. It protected you too. He'd have liked that. People ask what happened after. The truth is, the loud part ended in that courtroom, and what came next was quieter and, in its own way, harder. My father called me 3 days later. He didn't make excuses, which surprised me. He said, "I signed it too. I want you to know I'm not pretending I didn't. I knew it was wrong and I did it anyway, because it was easier than telling your mother no. I've been doing that for 40 years. A long pause. I'm sorry, Carolyn. It's too late for sorry to fix anything. I just didn't want to be a coward about that part too. It was the first honest thing my father had said to me in my adult life. It didn't fix anything. He was right about that. But I told him I heard him, and I meant it. Brooke was the one I didn't expect. When she understood where the car had actually come from, not family pooling resources, but a forged deed and a defrauded couple and a criminal referral. She drove the car to a dealership and sold it and sent the money to the Donnellys' attorney with a note that said, "I didn't ask the right questions. I'm asking them now." We're not close. We may never be. But she did the right thing when it cost her something, and that's more than I'd have predicted. My mother has not apologized. I don't expect her to. People who believe they only took what they were owed don't apologize. They wait for you to come around. The criminal matter is still working its way through the system, slowly, the way those things do. I'm not going to pretend to you that watching your own mother face charges feels like winning. It feels like grief wearing a different coat. So I set a boundary, and I want to be plain about it, because I think someone listening needs to hear that it's allowed. I don't speak to my mother anymore, not out of revenge, out of arithmetic. I added up 30 years of being the one who showed up, and I subtracted what came back. And the number was a forged signature. You're allowed to stop paying into an account that only ever withdraws. The Donnellys got their money back. We've stayed in touch, oddly. Patricia sends me a photo of the lake every now and then, because I told her she's welcome there anytime, and I meant it. Because the house is mine. The judge said so. The trust holds it, and Eleanor holds the trust. And Eleanor answers to the truth. Just like my uncle wrote. I drove out there last weekend, alone. The water was high and the new green was already darkening into summer. I walked down to the dock my uncle built one board at a time the summer I was 9, and I lay down on the warm boards, and I reached over the edge, down into the cold water, and I ran my fingers along the underside of the last post until I found them. T.C. and the date. Still there, right where he left them, right where I always knew to look. He told me he made sure I'd be all right. I used to think he meant the house. He meant he'd seen me. The whole time, he'd seen exactly who showed up and who didn't, and he built a wall the right people could climb and the wrong people couldn't, and he put my name on the inside of it. The wrong people reached for it anyway, and the wall held. I'm Carolyn Myers. I'm 31 years old. My uncle left me a house. My family tried to sell it out from under me. And the only thing they never thought to check was whether it had ever been theirs to take. It hadn't. It was mine to keep. And I'm keeping it.